What do all of these magic cards have in common? If I split it into two piles, would that help you figure it out? That's right, this is an almost complete list of every existing magic card that allows you to split things into piles and have either you or your opponents choose one of those piles to do something with. This is the I cut, you choose classic board game mechanic. And as I like to do as a board game designer myself, I try and challenge myself to design things within existing game spaces. I've created a custom root faction. We've created a whole bunch of custom content for Button the Clock Tower. And this time, I've challenged myself to make an entire cohesive commander precon deck around this particular game mechanic. So I had a look at the full list of I cut, you choose cards. And there's a couple of white ones, there's a couple of green ones, but the greatest bulk of them fit within grixis. And so I had to come up with a commander that would, specifically interact with this mechanic. And I created 18 other cards to, cohesively develop that strategy and encourage that kind of gameplay. And because we know a lot of the cards we have already in the set interact with putting cards into your hand from your library that your opponent mingles with in a way, we're going to be trying to be designing cards that interact with that and give more things kind of happening with that. Now let's reveal the commander. This is Melendi Bifurcator Sphinx. To bifurcate something, that means to split it into two, and that is literally what we are doing here. We are creating piles of cards. Now, the text on this one, I think, reads a little complicated. So I'll read it word for word, and then I will, give the, hey, this is what it does version. So text on the card says, if one or more of your non-land permanents would become the target of a spell your opponent controls, that opponent makes two piles of that spell's targets. Resolve that spell with the targets being only the permanents in the pile of your choice. Piles can be empty. And then the last line of text is, whenever a player makes piles, each opponent loses 2 life. So for that second part, whenever you're casting any of the many spells in your deck that splits things into piles, either creatures in play, cards from your deck, your graveyard, each opponent loses 2 life. So that is just going to be encouraging you to be playing many of the cards that say split into piles. However, the first bit, which is arguably the more complicated bit, but simplified, if your opponent casts a spell that targets one of your permanents, it creates a second pile which is empty, and then you choose one of those piles to become the legal target for that spell. If there is no legal target remaining because the pile is empty, that spell will fizzle. However, if they cast something like a multi-targeted spell, like Electrolyze is a great example. Electrolyze deals 1 damage to 2 of your guys. Well, you're going to make 2 piles still, with each of those targets being one of those piles, and then you pick one of those piles, and then the other one is unaffected by the spell. So it's a kind of a built-in evasion that creates piles and, kind of keeps your commander on the board so that it can be pinging your opponents for that lost life. This was one of the first cards that I designed with this concept in mind. There is a few other characters, a few other legendary characters we're going to be seeing later that might have been better commanders, because as I worked on it more time about the concepts, it was kind of thought through. And I do like this as a commander. One of the feels bad moments is that you play your commander and they get blown up immediately. Having some built-in evasion is kind of nice, but also this is not just like writing hexproof on the card and not writing hexproof on every card that you have. It means that certain removal spells like Cyclonic Rift or Vandal Blast don't actually interact with Melendi at all. And also it's specifically only spells. You can Ravenous Chupacabra my Melendi and I can't do anything about that. Now, in creating Melendi, and I knew that I was going to be making lots of piles, I was given some inspiration as to what some of those other kinds of mechanics should be interacting with the piles, and I came up with Squee. I like Squee a lot. Squee's had a lot of incarnations where he does different things. Like the original Squee would go from your graveyard to your hand in your upkeep. Squee the Immortal could be cast from your graveyard or from exile. And so now we have Squee atop the rock pile. Whenever Squee atop the rock pile is revealed in a pile, you may put Squee onto the battlefield tapped instead of into any other zone. So basically, most of the cards that you cast, stuff like Steam Augury, you're going to be revealing the top cards of your deck. They get split into piles. You pick one pile to put into your hand, and then the other pile goes to the graveyard. Squee basically says, I've been seen in any of these piles. I have a trigger where I'm going to move from whatever zone I would be put into from this pile, and I'm going to go onto the battlefield tapped instead. It's not broken, but you will see a lot of your deck in piles, and you can get a free Squee. This is kind of setting the power level for how crazy I want this deck to be, because the commander isn't super oppressive. You can't be making an infinite amount of piles each turn. Maybe you're getting 2, maybe 3, like really late game, and that's like 6 damage plus whatever you're getting out of combat. I think that's not crazy. I think that's fine. Nekuzar, which isn't a precon, is like way bigger and scarier than that. And so having something like Squee, which just comes in for free, is kind of cute and fun. And I kind of like that thing about it, where the piles that your opponent is making suddenly change in size because they know that Squee might leave one of those piles. Now, I have an awkward problem I've accidentally created for myself. I have a Sphinx commander, and my favorite creature that I've just put into the deck is a goblin. So what if we leaned into this really hard and we made a Sphinx and goblin theme about the deck? Now, you may have noticed from earlier on when I showed the deck list, and let me bring it up again. We have quite a few Sphinxes that split things into piles. I mean, I'm sitting in front of 2 of them. I'm sitting in front of Sphinx of Ithun and Sphinx of the Clear Skies, but we also have Curator of Destinies, and we also have Unesh over there on the right. So there is actually a lot of Sphinxes, so we could play some kind of Sphinx tribal thing going on. But then the first creature that I added to the 99 was a goblin, so maybe we should lean into that. Maybe we should create some more goblin and Sphinx synergy cards. And so then I created this. This is Cryptic Clan Melding, and this is where we start to see some of the story of the deck unfold with some of the cards that I have designed for it. This is a tribal enchantment, Sphinx Goblin. Sphinx spells you cast cost colorless less for each non-token goblin you control. Whenever a player splits cards into piles, create a 1/1 goblin creature token. Now this is really cool to me because it does 2 things that the deck cares about. Sphinx is really expensive to cast, so we make some of the Sphinxes a bit cheaper. Like Sphinx of Ithun, for example, is 5 blue. So if we have 5 non-token goblins in play, it's just blue, and then all it does is make a pile. And then when you make a pile, you get a token goblin. I don't think this card is that broken. It's like incredibly niche and specific to exactly what we're trying to do in this deck. However, compared to some of the other, like playing without it versus playing with it is going to be, kind of a big difference. And there's no tutors for something like this, but it works really, really well with what's going on, and it can be kind of helping your deck steam along a little bit. Now, we're going to stop here, and we're going to go and look at the other cards that I put into the deck, the existing Magic cards, and then we're going to come back and look at the other custom ones so that you can see what's going on. So this is our list of piles cards. We'll get back to that in a second. We're going to scroll right up to the top here, and we're going to look at some of the goblins. I probably should have put myself on the right-hand side, but it's too late. Starting with General Kriat, the Bolt Bringer, which makes goblins. Whenever 1 or more goblins you control attack, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token that's tapped and attacking. And then whenever another creature you control enters, the general will deal 1 damage to each opponent. And this is kind of the vibe that we're going for. We're trying to make a bunch of goblins. Those goblins are going to help us make the Sphinxes. Casting spells, making piles is going to deal damage to each of our opponents. And that's why we have Gutter Snipe here as well, because whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, which is what most of our pile making cards are, Gutter Snipe is going to deal 2 damage to each opponent. Now we also have Frostcliff Siege and Grenzo. Now, I like Grenzo. He's a silly card, and I think he would work just fine in this deck. He is X black red, and he enters the battlefield with X counters on it, which is not really a big deal. I don't care about that so much. But he has the ability, 2 colors, put the bottom card of your library into your graveyard. If it's a creature card with power less than or equal to Grenzo's power, put it onto the battlefield. Now, I wanted to add this card when I thought that a lot of the split into piles cards would put stuff on the bottom of your deck. Most of them actually just put it straight into the bin instead. So Grenzo's a little bit less good than I thought, but I wanted legendary goblins in the deck for some stuff that we'll see later. And I also like the idea of having just a bad creature tutor. Just a bad creature tutor is fine here. We're playing at precon power. We don't want mega synergy, and it's not a really goblin focused deck. It's a Sphinx focused deck that has just the kind of early couple turns with goblins. We also have Frostcliff Siege because I wanted something to give the goblins haste, and I also, with the whole theme of the deck is making piles and making an opponent choose, why not just add a bunch of cards that allow us to choose different modes and stuff like that. So I do like this one where we can go and choose card draw, because if we have a lot of goblins already, we can be making sure that we're getting through that combat, we're going to draw in that card. Or we can go for trample and haste, and then when we play our big Sphinx, it can bop right away. And then we have our land base. Now, how I determined what was going to be in this land base, because like I said, it is supposed to be precon power. I used the Doctor Who precon that was in Grixis colors. It has all the villains and stuff in it. And I didn't go 1-to-1. I picked a lot of stuff in it, and you can kind of see some stuff has loaded with the Doctor Who art because I have done that. I picked a lot of stuff from that list, and I added a couple of extra things like Castle Lochthwain, Grixis Panorama, and then like a couple of other things for consistency. Like I really like the Verges, Riverpire Verge. So we have each of the Verges in there as well. We also have Takanuma, the Abandoned Maya, and I had notes to design a land specifically that would work with the creating piles thing. And the idea that I had was if this land shows up in a pile, you can play it tapped from the pile, regardless of any playing land restrictions. And it felt out of color. If we were doing green, then maybe I would have added that, but I decided to scrap it. Then we have our 21 cards that allow us to split into piles. There's 2 specific cards omitted from this, one of which split each player's lands into 2 piles, and then you would destroy one of those piles. I think a thing that doesn't belong in a precon. And then there was an artifact that exiled the top 10 cards of your deck. An opponent made 2 piles, and then you searched one of those piles for a card to put into your hand, and then the rest stay exiled. It seemed really bad. And so we cut that too. But everything else is pretty much choose piles, put cards in your hand, choose piles, destroy things in that pile, or choose piles, and then that determines who can block in a combat. Now, that was one of the other things that inspired me to want to specifically choose goblins, because we're not just... there's 3 red cards, right? I could have just as easily gone into Esper, but I thought red was more interesting because we have Whims of the Fates, which is a really cool removal spell. It can also do land destruction, but you're picking the piles, my guy. You can be as greedy or not. And we also had Steam Augury, which I didn't particularly want to lose because I do like the Steam Augury. But we got 2 enchantments in red, which make it harder for opponents to block your creatures. So I kind of wanted to lean into that, and that's why I kind of wanted to go with the Goblin synergy, because it does kind of work with the stuff that we have that splits things into piles. I have a Lava Spur Boots, because Lightning Greens is in everything. We don't need that. I like Lava Spur Boots. It's not as broken, and it does the same thing for the same amount of mana. Basically, it costs 2 to give a guy haste and slight protection. Enough said, moving on. This is Goblin Pile Driver. And then we have our ramp artifacts. We got, some of the classics, Arcane Signet, Commander Sphere. We also have Goblin Electromancer, which weirdly ticked all of our boxes. It's a goblin. It's in a color that's not just red. And it interacts with the instants and sorceries that we're trying to cast to make piles. This is kind of a dunk. And we've got the Soul Ring, we've got the Izzet Signet, we've got the Talisman of Dominance, and I have 2 more of these to show off in a minute that I designed to fit specifically for the deck. I picked up 2 pieces of recursion here. Very, grixis feeling, but we have Goryo's Vengeance because we are playing a lot of legendary creature cards. And I feel like it kind of works nicely. We don't have any like really looting effects to like abuse the Goryo's Vengeance. It's more like I'm bringing back a guy that's already been into play at some point. But also, kind of when we're making piles, if my opponent makes a pile, that means that my big scary thing has to go into the bin. We do have that option in Goryo's Vengeance, and we do have that option in Whip of Erebos, because there isn't actually that much life gain, and there's a lot of damage being dealt out. We're going to be the threat. Having some level of sustain isn't too terrible. Then we have some light removal. We have Chainer's Edict, which is my opponent chooses a creature, it dies. I like opponent choice. We have Munitions Expert, which deals damage to the number of goblins you control. Which is kind of just like we're going to have a bunch of goblins. Let's make some goblin removal. That seems fine. I didn't want to play the cycling goblin that deals damage to stuff. I like the Munitions Expert better because we want goblins in play. We don't want goblins in the bin. We have Murderous Cut. Now, I had Shriek more before, but as I was moving along, I committed more and more to the Goblins and Sphinxes theme, and so I swapped it for Murderous Cut. We still do have some non-goblins and non-sphinxes, because we have Atris. I'll scroll back up for a second. We have Atris, Oracle of Hearth Troops, which is a creature that makes piles, and so we can't remove him. And so I've created exactly one other human creature to go with Atris, so he's not alone in this Sphinx Goblin deck. But we'll get to her later. Because we're almost at the end here. And we have our removal. Now I picked Phthisis. Swear to God, I know how to pronounce this card. Because of a specific card that I had designed that interacts with Suspend, which we're going to see in a little bit. I picked Tarfire because I wanted to make some tribal cards. And if I was making tribal Sphinx Goblin cards, like the enchantment we just saw, then adding Tarfire makes sense. And then our last 2 guys, this is the Goblin Rabble Master and the Sling Gang Lieutenant. These are classic make Goblin tokens, turn them sideways kind of cards. So all of our actual goblins in the deck are armies in a can, with the exception of Bar Driver. And the idea is to create a bunch of goblins in the early game, and then the Sphinxes start hitting the board and have some big, scary, hard-hitting effects. Now, let's keep our piles tab open, but then let's show you some of the other new cards that I created. Next is Unesh. So Unesh is an existing Sphinx, Unesh Cryo Sphinx Sovereign, who makes other Sphinxes cost less, and then he splits things into piles. And so I wanted to create another Unesh, which was like trying to communicate to the narrative a little bit, but I also kind of wanted us to play around with the mechanics in a little bit of a goofy way. So first of all, Unesh is a 5 colors, blue, black, flying 5/5 Sphinx god. And the text reads, as long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Unesh isn't a creature and is instead an equipment with 0 equip goblin. Equipped creature gains +5/+5 and flying. And then, whenever cards are split into piles, put a +1/+1 counter on each of your creatures for each card in the smallest pile. So he does cost 7. But with our enchantment, he could potentially cost a bit less. He can just sit around, and that's also fine. Even if he's not equipped to something, he's still going to be putting counters on each of your creatures. Now, what is interesting about this, using smallest pile as a mechanic, says that, let's say I reveal the top 5 cards of my deck, and my opponent has to split them into 2 piles, and then some will go to my hand, some will go to my graveyard. And my opponent goes, well, I'm going to make a 3 and a 2. And I go, that's great. I'm going to be able to put 2 +1/+1 counters on all of my creatures. And they go, oh, I don't want that. What if I make the smallest pile 0, and you get to draw 5 cards, but none of your creatures get any bigger? And then you can go, that sounds great. And so creating that kind of interaction, adding levels of harder choice to some of these existing mechanics, because, be honest, just splitting piles isn't winning me the game, isn't doing enough, and it's only pinging for a little bit of damage. This has basically Sphinx specific synergies with goblins. It's going to make the goblins that I have be better and do better, and that was kind of the idea. Because at this point I'm very committed to it being a Sphinx goblin deck. And so next, this is our big haymaker. That was kind of the idea, is that in the precon deck we have a lot of card advantage cards already. We have a couple of evasion, we have a little bit of removal, and then we have like a big Sphinx synergy where we're really relying on getting into the red zone with some of our creatures. But then here's our big haymaker Sphinx that's potentially going to close out the game if we get to resolve it. It says it's Metamai the Afflicted, which, if you remember, Metamai the Ageless is a blue-white Sphinx that we have made worse and turned it into a Grixis Shard Sphinx instead. Hence the the zombified look. It's a legendary creature, Zombie Sphinx. And its text reads, sacrifice a goblin. Each opponent mills 3 cards, loses 2 life, and discards a card. Now, because this can be done at instant speed, this can potentially lock down the game and keep every player hellbent, because you can activate it in an opponent's draw step before they have an opportunity to play anything at sorcery speed. And unless they have it instant, then they're kind of locked out. And so this is you closing the game, basically. If you have enough goblins in play, you can lock out the other 3 players and then try and win the game that way. If you have infinite goblins, then your opponent takes infinite damage and mills their entire library and has no cards in hand, so it doesn't matter. But the idea is that it was supposed to be kind of like a huge oppressive creature. Like this, hey, this is my big win con. And there is stuff that I could change to that first line of text to make it more forgiving, which could be this going to be activated once each turn or something like that. So that you wouldn't be discarding more than 1 card if you're the immediate player after this player, and then you have some options to do stuff. But then it has a second line of text, which is at the beginning of your end step, reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of goblins that died this turn. An opponent separates them into 3 piles, choose a pile to put into your hand, and shuffle the rest into your library. So the 3 piles thing is just to keep the size of the piles smaller. Because if you reveal 20 cards and your opponent has to make 2 piles, then the smallest pile can only be 10. If you reveal 21 cards and your opponent gets to make 3 piles, then the smallest pile is going to be 7, right? It helps a little bit diminish the size of the piles. When we see something like Ines Trigger and I'm putting 7+1/+1 counters on all of my guys, that's kind of huge. That's kind of a cool synergy. And it's also a big card advantage. But I do kind of like the design of this card. And this is one of those things where it's like, okay, we would go on playtest. It does cost 8. The whole goal is that it kind of ends the game. But it requires me to have a lot of goblins first. You could be killing the goblins in response. You could be countering Metamai. You could be interacting with it in such a way that it doesn't become a big problem. But if it does slam, no one has anything, I can potentially make you discard a couple cards, make it harder for you to be holding that answer. And then maybe that's how we clean up the game. But the thing is, I can't do this in a way pre-combat to make sure that combat ends the game, because all of our big damage deals like Rabble Rouser, like Pile Driver, require a lot of goblins. So I play Metamai, I swing with all my goblins, they get the attack boosts, then blocks or whatever's been blocked, I will then sacrifice and then make it pop off. So I think there's interesting interaction here with what this ace is trying to be doing. But I also think that the synergy is so specific that it's like jank anywhere else. It's like unplayable in any format that is not this precon. And that was kind of what I wanted to do here. But let's move on. So next is a second printing of Melendi. This is a Just Is It Melendi. And it was inspired by Hunting Velociraptor, which gives your dinosaur spells Prowl, and could make Goltar cost 3 instead of 12, 20 or whatever. And so the idea was to create something that would help us cast Sphinxes that wasn't just that tribal enchantment. And so we have Melendi Sphinx Warcaller. We are calling all of the Sphinxes to war. And so it has Flying Ward 2. If you've selected a pile this turn, Sphinx spells in your hand have suspend 5 for a blue, black, and a red. Whenever you select a pile, remove a suspend counter from a card you own in exile. So if I have a Sphinx suspended, because I've already selected a pile this turn, whenever I select any additional piles, I am then going to be able to remove the suspend counters from that Sphinx to make it cast slightly faster. So the idea is to create some kind of a suspend sub theme. When I was looking through it, I was like, I want to create some cards that feel very grixis. I want to create some cards that feel very Izzet. I want to create some cards that feel very goblin tribal. And we're trying to make those things work together by having some overarching pieces that, you know, reach across those different themes. And so this is one of them. This is, you know, not really as much an Izzet card. But like it is kind of Joyer of the Gitu coded, where it's like, well, I'm just going to be suspending a bunch of my guys, and then they'll come in for, you know, cheaper than what I paid for them, just not yet. Which I think kind of works fine. I don't think it's too crazy. It does cost 5, but like the body is also kind of on cost. Flying Ward 2 for 5/5/5 is pretty good. But like Melendi obviously can't make herself cast for cheaper, and it just makes your other bigger Sphinxes potentially cheaper, but later in the game. I don't think this is too broken. I think this is definitely at the precon kind of power level, especially when we have stuff like Hunting Velociraptor, which is just like, okay, if I have dealt damage with the dinosaur this turn, then here's my 2020 power guy for 3 mana. This is much less broken than that. Alright, let's move on to our next piece. So this is Sphinx's Ultimatum. I did want a big haymaker that wasn't a creature, but it's also a tribal sorcery Sphinx. This is a thing that I wanted to do, and I do kind of like the design of this card. It is kind of goofy, and you know, laugh when you get the joke, please. But I'll read the text out for you. Here it says, search your library for up to 9 cards and split them into 3 piles. For each pile, an opponent chooses one option not chosen already. The first option, cast all cards in the chosen pile without paying their mana costs. The second option, exile all cards in the chosen pile with 3 suspend counters on them. Those spells gain suspend. And the third option, shuffle all cards in the chosen pile into the deck. It should be into your library, but I've been making Cutlass for 7 years, coming some slack. And then the flavor text is morning, afternoon, evening. You get it. And that's kind of the vibe that we're going here with the classic Sphinx's riddle of, you know, what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening. And this is kind of that vibe. So here is potentially 3 spells that I'm casting for free right now. Here is 3 spells that I'm potentially casting for free in 3 turns. And here is 3 spells that are not going to be cast. I think that's kind of cool. And obviously your opponent gets to pick what those things are going to be. If you put all your best shit in one pile, that's the one shuffled into the deck. If you spread them out evenly, if you put Omniscience in one of those piles, like the classic Ultimatum kind of gameplay that we see now, then they go, well, that's probably the pile I'm shuffling into the deck. You can have one of these other piles to cast. You can suspend one of these other piles. And I think that's kind of cool. I really like how this card works. And I don't think it's busted, mostly because the other cards in the deck aren't crazy if you cast them for free. It does cost 7 colored mana. But in other formats, I could see it being crazy. Like, it literally is just... because it doesn't have the different names clause, like some of like the Bug Ultimatum does, whatever that clan is called these days. So it is slightly more powerful than the existing Ultimatums that we have, but it's, you know, kept in check because there isn't an Omniscience, there isn't any you lose a million life kind of cards in the deck already, so it's not that crazy. And like, if we do hit our Haymaker, one of our big Sphinxes, then that can just be the pile that's shuffled back into the deck. It's not really that big a deal. So I do like this card. I do like how this card turned out. But let's move on to the next one. This is A Riddle Among Friends. So this is an interesting card because I wanted to create something that It's like a different approach to Grixis. This is much more like a Grixis Pirates kind of card. So it's a blue, black, red legendary enchantment, a riddle among friends. The text reads, Raid. At the beginning of your end step, if you attacked this turn, reveal cards from the top of your library equal to the number of legendary permanents you control. An opponent splits them into 2 piles, and you choose all the cards of one type from one of those piles to put into your hand, put the rest in your graveyard. So they're making 2 piles, and then you're picking cards from one of those piles to put into your hand. So if, let's say, pile 2, the pile I'm going to pick from, has 3 creatures, 1 instant, 1 sorcery, I can take those 3 creatures. It's not insane card advantage. It requires me to have attacks with the creature. It's the number of cards revealed is potentially going to have an empty pile in it, right? And if you reveal 2 cards and your opponent sees 2 creatures, they can make 2 piles. You're only going to get 1 creature, the other one's going to go to the bin. And the more legendary things that you have in play, because most of the Sphinxes are legendary, it's going to start to generate a little bit more value for you. And that was kind of the idea. It's not broken. It slowly ramps up a little bit. It does get you a pile made every turn to potentially activate your commander's extra damage, to potentially create some goblins, to potentially interact with some card advantage. And that's kind of what I wanted. It's a lot of text to do not that much, but it kind of fits into the deck, like it's kind of the vibe that the deck is going for. So I think it works. I think this is a good one. Okay, next up is Bone Piles. This is one of the first cards that I made because it felt necessary to have something like this. This is Bone Pile, a black colorless enchantment that says skip your draw step. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top 3 cards of your library. Choose an opponent to split them into 2 piles. Put all the cards from one pile into your hand and the rest into the graveyard. We're making a pile. We're drawing potentially 2 cards or 1 good card each turn. It says skip your draw step, so it's basically Necropotence. It's pretty on theme. It's pretty fitting. It kind of works with what we're going on. It kind of works at the power level. Like, just drawing an extra card is not that crazy. But the whole idea is that it's making an extra pile. It has that make piles synergy. It's going to activate your commander to deal damage. That's kind of what we're trying to build on. We're trying to make more cards that make piles so that your things that care about making piles activate and do stuff. So I thought this was fine. I don't think it's undercosted. I think 3 is fine. It's basically Phyrexian Arena, but you're not taking damage, and like maybe damage should be added to that. Like if you pick the pile with 2 cards, take a damage or something like that. But I think at the moment it's fine. Skipping your draw step means that a lot of other cards that interact with your draw step and give you extra draws or something like that is bad, good, I don't know. It turns off one of my most hated cards, Smothering Tide, because I'm not drawing cards anymore. I don't draw cards in my draw step. I just put cards in my hand. I'm just always picking a pile of cards to put in my hand. And so maybe that makes it broken, but maybe also just ban Smothering Tide. That would make this card worse, so I'm also okay with that. But yeah, I felt like just like a kind of standard, because we've seen the complicated good draw card, and now we've seen the standard draw enchantment. And so next I wanted to create this card. I think this card is really cool. It also does communicate a little bit of the story to us, but this is Melendi's Boon Granted. It is a tribal instant Sphinx, and it is in blue, black, red, and it says reveal the top 3 cards of your library. An opponent splits them into 2 piles. Put 1 pile into your hand and manifest the rest with a death touch counter. Now this is a great, I need blockers. Here's 2, I'm throwing anythings at you. You know what they are because you've seen them. You've split the piles and I've manifested them. But here's 2 blockers, or you go 0-3 and I'm either choosing to draw 3 cards or make 3 blockers. Or I'm making 1 blocker to block your 1 guy and I'm drawing 2 cards. I think this is a really cool card. I really like the idea of manifesting unwanted things from a pile, and like this does that job really, really well. It's card advantage, it's instant speed, it makes blockers. It's pretty good. The death touch counter one I think is kind of important because it is supposed to be more of a combat trick, and it being specifically blue, black, red is kind of brutal otherwise. But if this card was deemed too powerful, that's the thing that I remove. It's just, you just manifest one of the piles and then draw the others, which I think is fine. I don't think that's too crazy. It's just kind of making blockers at instant speed. And I do actually really like the manifest mechanic. And I did make a couple of other cards. I think only one of them ended up ending up being in the deck. But let's look at the next card. So we made two different mana rocks, and this is the first of them. So this is the Cube of Twisted Dreams. It is 3 colorless artifact, and it has tap, add blue, black, or red. So it is color fixing. It's just basically the same as tap, add a color that's equal to your commander's color identity, except that like this is specific to the Grixis deck, so we're just going to specifically make Grixis mana instead of something like Commander Sphere or Command Tower. But it has this second line of text, which says, whenever cards are split into piles the first time each turn, add blue, black, or red equal to the number of cards in the smallest pile. So, if I am casting Steam Augury, and my opponent, does a classic 3 and 2, I'm going to get maybe a blue and a red back to cast more cards. Steam Augury just got a discount. But if my opponent does a 5 and 0, I get no mana. If my opponent does a 4 and 1, I get 1 mana. Using the smallest pile mechanic makes the actual split piles card harder to make those choices, because the size of the smallest pile is going to benefit me, even if that is not the pile that I choose. And I like that a lot. I think that works really well, because pretty much most of the time I'm making piles, it's just to draw cards. And getting a little bit of a mana refund from that is pretty good. However, there is cards like Raging River, which when I go to combat, I pick all of my opponent's creatures and split them into piles, which could trigger the Cube of Twisted Dreams to make 6 red or something, depending on how many blockers my opponent has and how big the smallest pile is. But then that's mana at, I can only use it instant speed, which I guess I can cast something. There's a lot of instants that make piles, and then I make up more pile. So it is interesting. It does enable more versatility, but like the mana is not when you need it. It's just whenever you've made a pile, and it's just whenever you've made a pile, maybe try and make another pile, which I think is fine. I don't think that's crazy broken or anything, and so I think that's fine. Because I needed a mana rock, and I wanted a mana rock that was kind of on theme, and I think this is just doing what I wanted it to. But let's move on to the other mana rock. This is Plinth of the Sphinx. Really easy words to say. It's the Sphinx Plinth, the Plinth of Sphinx. It is a 3 colorless artifact that taps to make 1 colorless, but then it also has blue, black, red, sacrifice Plinth of Sphinx, search your library for a Sphinx card, and put it into your hand. And remember, we have tribal instance with the creature type Sphinx on it, and the tribal sorcery. So that could be potentially very, very good also, and that's kind of why I specifically wanted to use the tribal typing, because we're building a tribal deck, and there's no tribal Sphinx cards, but there is tribal goblin card anyway. I kind of like this. And it has the flavor text. It isn't lounging around. It's peak riddle formulating, and that's kind of the vibe. It's very a pondering pose from our Sphinx up there. And so I think this, also just kind of fits in kind of nicely. It's not broken. It doesn't go that crazy in like literally any other deck. It's just fine, I think. It kind of does what we want. All right, let's move on to our next one. So I wanted to create some custom goblins so that Squee wasn't the only one, and I wanted a goblin that made piles. I needed to hit pile mechanic within all the different categories of things that we're adding to the deck, and I didn't have a goblin that did that. So here is Skitch the Impatient. It is a legendary creature, goblin warrior, 3/2 for 2 colors, a black and a red, and its ability reads, when Skitch enters the battlefield, choose an opponent to split creatures you control into 2 piles. Choose a pile to gain haste and menace. The rest gain first strike and skulk. Skulk is a really underused keyword, and I like it quite a bit. And it kind of works really well for goblins because a lot of them, are 1/1s. But first strike and skulk don't synergy very well together. But it means that if you have to pick a pile that, because you also can be picking sphinxes, if you pick a pile that has sphinxes in it, them getting first strike can also be good. And then haste and menace is obviously you're going to try and do your best to pick your creatures that have so many seconds to give them haste, and your opponent's going to be trying to split piles to not give haste to the maximum number of things. That's probably going to be the biggest consideration. And then your opponent is basically choosing what keywords your creatures are going to have for this combat. And I think that's really cool. And it's just for one turn, right? Because it's just when Skitch enters. So if Skitch enters and Skitch is not picked in the pile to get haste, then Skitch is like, okay, I'll just wait, I guess. I'll have first strike and skulk. I'm not going to do anything right now. But that big Sphinx guy, I gave him haste and menace, which I think is kind of funny. And I think it works just fine. It's kind of what I wanted. I didn't want to create a goblin that just split up blockers like Raging River and stand all 4 dots, because we have that already. We don't need a third. You don't need to staple that to a creature. Okay, so let's move on to the next one, which is Wingless Quizzical. This is a colorless red creature, Goblin Sphinx. It is a 2/2, and it reads, whenever cards from a pile not chosen would go to your graveyard, you may manifest one of those cards. So basically, and I love using Steam Augury as my example, I cast a Steam Augury, my opponent makes a pile of 3 and a pile of 2, I put the pile of 3 in my hand, the pile of 2 would go to the graveyard. Wingless Quizzical triggers and sees those cards entering the graveyard, and then you get to choose one of them and manifest it. Which is kind of just avoiding filling up your bin with too much jank, but also it's an army in a can. This deck plays a lot of armies in a can, because that's what the specific goblins chosen are supposed to do. And that kind of works fine. It's one of those things, it's you're making a pile, here is a benefit for making a pile. If you're making lots of piles, here's a benefit for making lots of piles. And I think that's fine. I also like the idea that a Sphinx army interacts with a lot of face-down creatures that you don't know what they are. Is that literally not the Sphinx's riddle? So I think Manifest and Sphinxes goes really well together, but it's not a thing that has happened in Magic the Gathering yet. And then the flavor text is, the War Alliance with the Goblins produced more oddities than just the meeting transcripts. I wanted to actually kind of communicate some stuff that was about the story and what had kind of happened. And the thing that I had in my head was basically a goblin solved the riddle of the Sphinx and got to ask Melendi for a boon, which is a wish, basically. And that wish was to fight. What do goblins want to do? They just want to fight. And so now the Sphinxes are boon bound to fight with the goblins against whatever the goblins are fighting, which I think is really funny. It's like a really interesting, goofy kind of lore connotation. And realistically, I should have made a creature which was Squee and Melendi, because we have that cycle of legendary creatures, which is 2 known legendary creatures. And that could have been something. Maybe if I elaborate on this in the future, I'll do that, but it's maybe overdoing it. I don't know. It's difficult to tell exactly how much of the narrative is supposed to be communicated in a precon set like this, because this one in particular is trying to be really specific about what is supposed to be happening. But the Doctor Who one that I referenced earlier, it's just all the villains. It's just the villains are there, and then the narrative of what's happening exists already in Doctor Who. They're not communicating a new narrative. They're not implying anything that hasn't happened in Doctor Who. Whereas I'm implying something that hasn't happened in Magic the Gathering, and I'm trying to communicate a little bit of that through some of the story. Which is kind of the point of the flavor text anyway. And I don't know. I think this kind of works. This card is strong, but there's not enough things that make piles for this to be good in any other format. It doesn't actually make a manifesting right away, so it could die before it ever gets a chance to. So I think it's fine. I don't think it's too powerful. Now we get to move on to our human wizard, our second human character in the entire deck. This is Tasha of No Regrets. You might know Tasha from her hideous laughter, her D&D Baldur's Gate set appearance, where she shows up as a planeswalker, which is a card that I like a lot. I really like the arena version of the Tasha planeswalker. I think it's a fantastic card, and she doesn't have a creature. She doesn't have a legendary creature version of her. So I was like, well, let's send it. And this was the second card that I made, and so I'll point out some of the mistakes that I made. But Tasha of No Regrets is a 3 colors, blue, blue, black, legendary creature, human wizard. And I've forgotten to include apparent toughness. Mistake number 1. And it says, when Tasha enters the battlefield, each opponent chooses a creature they control to become a pile. So if I have 3 opponents, there's going to be 3 piles where each opponent selects one of their creatures to become their pile, basically. And then for each pile, choose one, which should be, for each pile, choose one not chosen already. And then the 3 options are, have its controller sacrifice it, you gain control over it, or you put 2 -1/-1 counters on it. So this is a little bit more like a Cataclysmic Gearhulk kind of effect, where Cataclysmic Gearhulk reduces everything of one typing to you having only one of them, where this is kind of like, okay, each of you are offering up something, and I'm going to be picking the most destructive outcome from amongst those things. Like if you show me a Mana Dork, maybe I'll put the 2 counters on it. If you only have one big thing, I might gain control of it, and then I'll kill whatever the last thing is. Unless if you have if 2 people have any one big thing, I'll gain control of one of them, and I'll make the other one be sacrificed. Now, piles are empty only if an opponent controls no creatures. Kind of needed to be said. And that was kind of the idea. I wanted like a creature that makes a pile, and it's a very blue-black effect, where it's just like a minor board wipe. It's a decimate type effect. I really did name drop a green-red card to explain a blue-black experience, but anyway, you can get angry about me in the comments. That's what they're there for. Next is Metamize Mountaintop. I have yet to create a card that is not a tongue twister in some way in this set. Metamize Mountaintop is a blue, black, red legendary enchantment, and it has 2 different lines of text. The first line of text is, Sphinxes you control have tap. Create 2 tapped 1/1 red goblin warrior creature tokens. Which, as you may notice, the big Sphinx cares a lot about you having a lot of goblins, and tap making 2 is almost enough for you to lock out the entire board if they are all hellbent and keep them all hellbent. But obviously it has to not have summoning sickness, and also you would need at least 1 other goblin. But that's a pretty good start, a pretty good combo. Now, second line of text, whenever a pile of cards goes to your graveyard from anywhere, you may put 1 of those cards on top of your library. This is just like a Noxious Revival type effect, where it's like, okay, I was really invested in getting this thing from this pile. I unfortunately will not get it, but I can put it on top of my deck, and the next time I make a pile, I have an opportunity of picking it again. Oh, you still didn't give it to me this time? All right, I'm making a 3rd pile, and I'm hoping that this time I'm going to get the thing that I'm looking for, which is kind of funny, but it does kind of work. It does kind of do what the deck's trying to do. But the main part of Sphinxes you control make goblins. Now, there's like a curve thing, right? Where the first couple turns of the game, you're really only playing goblins because that's what you can afford, and then you start being able to play Sphinxes because either they become cheaper, they come off suspend, or you have enough mana in play to be able to start making Sphinxes. And then the Sphinxes hit the board, they draw you some cards, they have an existing effect upon the game, but then also can start making goblin tokens as well to potentially sit there and block, and then have your goblin army be the thing that's attacking. They're feeding the Rabble Master, they're feeding the Pile Driver, and I think that works really well. It's like a really interesting, I'm not all aggro, or I am aggro at the beginning of the game, and like later on I'm a bit more control, which I kind of like. It's an interesting kind of flexibility for something that a precon can offer. Now we only have 2 cards left. The first of which is Dine Alm Army Unswallower. It is a 3 colorless black legendary creature Sphinx with a multi-kicker hybrid blue-red, blue-red. For each time this spell was kicked, you may return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield with mana 3 or less. The whole point was, coming into this, I noticed all of the Sphinxes that we had were blue. All of the good Sphinxes are blue-white. The whole thing was that we were trying to color shift them to be more grixis Sphinxy. And I created an Izzet Sphinx, and I created a bunch of grixis Sphinxes, and so we needed a mono-black Sphinx. You could argue this one is also grixis because of the multi-kicker cost. And I think that's kind of what I wanted, but basically you get a reanimate that is just barely on rate, like it's 4/2, get something that costs 3. And the idea is that it will return a bunch of your important army and a can goblins to play after there's been a board wipe. It is a 3/3. It does not have flying like most Sphinxes, but it has the flavor text of carry a whole army in that gullet. You'd never expect a rain of goblins quite like that, which I thought was kind of a funny mental image. But I think this is a cool card. It was basically looking at what tools needed to fit into the deck, because if all the goblins get board wiped, your big Haymaker Sphinx doesn't do anything. It requires goblins as an engine for its effects to happen. And so Dynalm is able to go, bam, okay, here is some goblins. Here is an amount of goblins. And those goblins hopefully make more goblins. And I can potentially tap and make goblins. Here, now I feed you the goblins to activate your oppressive effect. Which I think was necessary, and I didn't want to print other things. There is exactly one reanimate spell, Boneyard Parlay, but it costs 7, and this is the same actually. Like, to get one guy back, this also costs 7. So having just a second thing, I think works fine. I could have made this also make piles. I decided not to. It could have literally been like split all of your creatures that are goblins into piles, and then you pick one pile and reanimate it or whatever. That all would have been fine. But I felt like this was more elegant. You don't always have to super commit to the theme. There's plenty of things to split piles already. I just wanted there to be a good Sphinx that was going to work well to assist the Haymaker spell. Now, ace in the hole. Alright, and then our last card, our spookiest card. Maybe I should not have left this one for last, but this is a funny design to me. This is Sphinx Lackey. It is colorless blue-red creature, Sphinx Goblin 2/2. Now, there is a creature called Goblin Lackey, and whenever Lackey deals damage to an opponent, you put a Goblin from your hand into play. This is the notorious Legacy All-Star, probably EDH All-Star as well. It's a busted card, and it goes crazy really fast. And I wanted to make something like that fit in with what the deck was trying to do. So what it reads is, whenever Sphinx Lackey deals damage to a player, split your hand into 2 piles, one face up, one face down. The defending player chooses one of those piles. You may exile a card from the chosen pile, face up, with 2 suspend counters on it. It gains suspend. So I created a little bit of a suspend sub-theme amongst the Sphinx to match the Izzet part of the Grixis deck. Because the way these splits, the make piles things kind of fits, right, is we have Raging River and Standoff Fall. So all of the red things care about combat, with the exception of Whims of the Fates, which is kind of like a full board wipe. All of the black cards, Do or Die, Liliana the Veil, Make an Example, Hostile Negotiations, well, except for Hostile Negotiations, but the first 3 is removal. And then all of the blue adjacent cards, draw cards. And so I wanted to, specifically pick out some Izzet cards to make suspend work, and find a way to cast Sphinxes for cheaper, basically. Because otherwise there's like a big gap between what's going on in the 4 and 5 region. We have no goblins and you have no Sphinxes, and you're just kind of waiting to start playing Sphinxes. And some of this could be accomplished by playing Skirk Prospector, by playing a lot of other stuff. And I didn't want to make it too powerful. I think the goblins that I did pick are already kind of crazy. And then having a Sphinx that costs 3 that can activate that enchantment to tap and make goblins is pretty good. We have a lot of our pile stuff already. And like setting up things like Goblin Pile Driver, trying to set up things like Goblin Rabble Master is kind of the vibe. It's my attempt at trying to make a fun EDH deck. It has a goofy theme. It has, light removal. It doesn't really have any tutors in it. It has some resilience to it, recursion. There's a little bit of ramp to it. It has some, interesting creature synergies with both Sphinxes, both Goblins. It has a really obvious and straightforward early game, and then it has a more control-y close out the game kind of late game, which means that as you're getting into the more interesting parts of the game, you're getting to do a little bit more. There's specifically no counter magic in here. I designed a few counter spells where you split things into piles. It's a nightmare. I didn't include them because they suck. I think the land base is pretty consistent with the precon. I'm a little bit generous because I'm playing the Surveil lands and I am playing the Verges. But all the precons that I looked at for the land base had all of the Frostboil Snarl type thing, where it's like reveal a basic land type from your hand, but they're not playing shocks, they're not playing triomes, they're not playing perfect duels, they're not playing a lot of things that actually have these basic types. And so I was like, well, I should add things that have these basic types, like the Mystic Sanctuary that you can see behind me is an island. And I was just trying to make it be a bit more forgiving, I think. I think I did okay. I think it's... With the way that the Commander precons have been creeping in power, this is probably pretty in line with what's going on. But also the deck is very color intensive and very color heavy. And there's no like fixing with fetches or whatever. There's like Terramorphic Expanse and grixis Panorama, but it's not that crazy. And then that's kind of the deck. That was the whole idea. I spent the entire day working on this, really. I could have designed more cards for it, but one of the things that Blood on the Clock Tower has taught me that players are only willing to accept a certain amount of brand new things. And there you go, you got 20 new things instead of what could have been a lot more. But it does mean that there's a lot of goblins that you might be familiar with. There's a lot of sphinxes that you might be familiar with. And that was kind of the idea. I just wanted to play around with that. I wanted to test my design skills and see what it was like to try and design something within Magic the Gathering. Now, if you're a big fan, and if you've been enjoying the Commander content that I've been making, and you want to see more stuff like this, you want to see me try and make more precons around a specific mechanic or a specific tribe, or me try and come up with some new mechanics and try and do some of that kind of stuff, let me know. Get in that comment section or berate me about how I've messed up something that exists already. That's also fine. I like arguing with people in the comments. I do it all the time. And, let me know, because I'm enjoying playing Magic again. It's a nice change. It's been 21 years since I learned to play, and the game has changed so much, and we're getting a lot of new and interesting cool things, and the design space is opening up in such a way that there is more to play with for my game design brain, and I'm enjoying that, and I look forward to creating more content. So stick around if you're interested in seeing more of that. I'm going to have the playlist up on the screen for all the Commander stuff that I'm working on at the moment, as well as a random video of some of the other cool stuff that we do here on the channel. It's possibly Blood on the Clock Tower. Maybe it's Cutlass, the TCG that I created and that you can download and play for free. Or it's just the subscribe button up there next to it, which you should also click, because I don't know, I put a lot of time into this, and seeing the number go up make me happy.